If you read these stories, then you know the X-Men. Hey, what's up, nerd fam? This is your boy Gershawn, and I want to welcome you to Enter the Nerds. So if you love comics, manga, anime, and all that cool nerd stuff, you're going to love this channel. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for some more content. Now today, we're going to be talking about the X-Men. This is going to be the second installment in the You Don't Know series, as in you don't know the X-Men unless you've read these stories. Now, it's not going to be every single story from the X-Men, but just some that I think that you should read, especially if you want to get into the mythos and really understand what makes the X-Men the X-Men. So before we get into some stories, let's get into a little bit of their background. I almost forgot, the X-Men also have different teams. So besides like having different iterations of their standard X-Men team, there's X-Force, X-Factor, Excalibur, Generation X, New Mutants, and then other flagship titles that came afterwards, like Astonishing X-Men, All New X-Men, X-Men Gold, tons of cool stuff. So you didn't just, they actually were able to make crossover titles within themselves, which is why X-Men is such a crazy universe, because they don't need to interact with the Avengers or anyone else they didn't want to. They have literally all their own villains and tons of characters within them, which is why I guess it's so disappointing that their films were so crappy. But yes, back to the stories. The X-Men debut issue was released in 1963. The idea behind creating the X-Men were to create superheroes with powers that, not just superheroes, but even the villains, that they didn't get these powers from like a lab accident, or they weren't like given by like a god or something. They were just, born that way. And what if with them being born that way, they also had to face persecution from humans, people around them, their own family members, stuff like that, just to add that extra layer to them. Now, the main conflict was actually between Professor Xavier, because his ideology was, let me get these mutants that are born this way, mentor them and show them how to use their powers for good, and also to protect themselves if need be. And that was for the Institute for Gifted Youngsters, I believe that was the original name for it. And they stayed in the X-Mansion, and they were a bit diametrically opposed to the Brotherhood of Mutants led by Magneto, who himself was a Holocaust survivor. And so he went through one layer of persecution to then go through another from being a mutant. So his view on how mutants should interact with humans was very, very different. And they often came against each other, and then sometimes they had to team up with each other too if their interests became aligned. Because they both did want mutants to, thrive. It was just in very different ways. Some people think that this is a direct Malcolm X and Martin Luther King comparison, but if you actually knew Malcolm X, you'd understand that it's not really a one-to-one example. But that'll be a video for later, right? But yes, those are the main things. Now, that original run of X-Men didn't do very well, and it actually got canceled in 1970. And then in 1975, when Giant Size X-Men came out, that's when it really revamped. That was Len Weiss. He made that. So that's technically the first thing you should be reading. The first story I'll say you should be reading is Giant Size X-Men #1, because that introduced Wolverine. Well, Wolverine was already in Incredible Hulk. That's when he first came out. But as an X-Men, it was Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Storm, Colossus, and Thunderbird, right? And that team was going to save the original First Class. That's how they introduced them, and that's really what gave way to what Chris Claremont's vision was going to be later on, when he made Uncanny X-Men, which was released in the same year. So pretty much you start getting like, this team comes later on, but it gave birth to that. It gave birth to all those ideas that we're going to be talking about, and a lot of the other stories we're going to get into. So without further ado, let's get into some of these iconic stories that I believe you should be reading if you really want to know the X-Men. Now here's the first of many Chris Claremont stories I'm going to be mentioning on this list. Days of Future Past, which was very important because it was the first time travel story the X-Men ever had. It sowed tons of seeds. Now what happened in this story was, this takes place in the dystopian future where the pretty much mutants and pretty much a whole bunch of superhumans are kept in internment camps by Sentinels. And Kitty Pryde is sent back to her past body to stop the event which caused it, which was the assassination of Robert Kelly and Professor Xavier. Yeah, very, very important. And you actually see tons of ripple effects from this and other alternate universes that are made because of this. And also, this was adapted in a major motion film, which we saw, which attempted to rewrite some mistakes, but ultimately, yeah, still needs help. let's get into the Dark Phoenix saga, which is technically made up of two different stories. The first being the Phoenix Force story, where Jean Grey first encounters the Phoenix Force, possesses her, and it's about, repairing the Mcron crystal. You meet Cyclops' father, Corsair, you meet the Shi'ar, tons of stuff is established. Now, the Dark Phoenix saga is different because that more revolves around not just the Phoenix Force, but the Hellfire Club trying to control Jean Grey and the Phoenix, and obviously that doesn't go as well. It has tons of really cool interpretations of Jean Grey and the X-Men, a really cool Wolverine story, and one of the best Wolverine stories ever inside of it, actually. Also, the introduction of Emma Frost, and this is Kitty Pryde's actually first debut here, and Jean Grey winds up destroying, actually eating a star and killing billions of people before having to sacrifice herself. So a lot of really important stuff goes on in here. Didn't want to give away too much, but want to get you interested in the story. Must read. And yes, this is the third story I've mentioned so far that has been adapted into a movie. Maybe not a good one though, but still adapted nonetheless. Another favorite of mine, I think very important, is God Loves, Man Kills. It's actually when it focuses on William Stryker. He's actually Reverend William Stryker. Like his wife gave birth to a son who was a mutant. He killed them both, and he goes on this entire rampage where he wants to see the extermination of the mutant race, and he uses pretty much faith to get people to follow along and be cool with this type of extermination. Now, it's crazy because it really goes into that ideology that if you get people to really believe in fear, what you can motivate people to do. This was actually also, this was used as a motivation, not motivation, of the inspiration for the X-Men 2 movie, where he also appeared in, was systematically hunting down mutants, because it's the same thing that happened in this story. Mutant Massacre is awesome. That was actually when the Marauders were following a Morlock named Tommy and I think one of her boyfriends to find out where the Morlocks were. It's like an underground society of mutants where a lot of them are kind of like physically disfigured, so they can slaughter them. The X-Men have to go in to try and stop it. Thor actually gets involved too, since it's a crossover event. And a lot of bad consequences happen here. Like Colossus has to use deadly force for the first time. He's badly injured. Kitty Pryde is stuck in her phase form. Nightcrawler is messed up. Wolverine and Sabretooth have a crazy battle. Sabretooth actually gets into the X-Mansion, so he proves that it's not really as safe as everybody thought it was, but he was stopped by Psylocke, I believe. Tons of crazy stuff happens in this one. And it also introduces Mr. Sinister. It was actually his plan the whole time, because apparently Dark Beast, a character from the Age of Apocalypse storyline, actually has been in the past of our Prime universe, and the Morlocks are pretty much experiments of his. So yeah, crazy story. Next we have Age of Apocalypse, which is a crazy storyline because in the 90s there was a lot of crazy motifs that happened in the 90s, but this one actually really stuck. This story was when Legion, or David Haller, this is Professor Xavier's son, goes back in time to try to kill Magneto, but he kills Professor Xavier instead. And what happens is Apocalypse attacks 10 years earlier, which creates this alternate future where Apocalypse rules the world, right? And obviously tons of stuff happened here. New mythology is established. Characters that acted one way don't act this way anymore. I don't want to give up too many details. The Phalanx Covenant was another interesting story that had these humans who hated mutants, of course, right? They used Warlock, who's an alien, who had this techno-organic virus. They used it on themselves to transform themselves into like these shape-shifting forms who were a hive mind that can hunt down mutants. Now, this is really cool because it was a crossover between like X-Factor, X-Force, Excalibur, Generation X. It just was a really, really cool storyline on there. The Phalanx Covenant was also adapted on the X-Men animated series. Now, they were made to be just completely alien and not human at all, but they still functioned the same way and even had some characters have the same roles in there. So, maybe different interpretation, but it was fine. Still a good storyline. Must read this. Okay, another big one. House of M, which in this storyline, Professor Xavier, Emma Frost, and other notable mutants realize that Wanda, or Scarlet Witch, her powers are they're crazy, right? She has reality warping powers, and she's actually losing her mind. And Professor Xavier can't even really hold in her powers anymore. So they've come down to the conclusion that maybe the only way to stop her would be to kill her, but they want to actually talk to her in person and see if they can find another way before actually getting to that. Now, obviously, this gets to her father, Magneto, and her brother Quicksilver, and they don't want that to happen, so they manipulate her into getting her to warp reality to where everyone gets what they want in terms of Magneto making a reality where the mutants are subjugating humans. Peter Parker marries Gwen Stacy. Emma is with Cyclops. Pretty much all the stuff that they want, you know. But what's bad is obviously that Wolverine, you know, because of his mind, he actually is starting to remember what's really going on. He sees Hawkeye, who's supposed to be dead. Tons of crazy stuff is happening, and they need to enlist Doctor Strange because he also remembers what the timeline is to help out. And once Scarlet Witch does remember what's going on and she knows that she's being manipulated, she pretty much says like, "Hey, mutants, we don't deserve to live," and blah blah. And she goes, "No more mutants," which she says no more mutants, and pretty much decimates the mutant population by depowering them, which leads to the subsequent story Decimation, which talks about that and how it affects mutants and which mutants have been affected. And even though some of them don't have powers, are still disfigured, which is weird because it's like, did it negate the X gene or not? Whatever, right? So after Decimation in House of M comes Messiah Complex, which chronicles the first birth, like the first mutant that's born after the whole M Day or the House of M incident, right? And now all these mutants are going after her. The Purifiers, the Marauders, the X-Men, they want to get to her because, you know, she seems like she might be the answer to everything. Now, the thing is, at the end of that issue, Cable winds up taking her to the future, similar to what happened to him, because obviously Cable is the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. To save him from the organic virus, techno-organovirus, he had to go to the future. So something similar happens with her, and yeah, that's pretty much what happens there. But Messiah Complex leads to tons of other stuff, like Avengers versus X-Men, because Hope Summers is seen to be the host of the Phoenix, and that could bring back mutants, their population and stuff like that. But the Avengers also know that the Phoenix Force is especially dangerous for the entire world, so they want to stop that. But obviously Cyclops sees that as a way to bring back the mutants, so that brings them into a huge conflict. And even before Avengers vs. X-Men, there was a thing called Schism, which was right before it, which was an important story as well, because it showed like what Wolverine and Cyclops thought that the Institute of Mutants should be used for. Like Wolverine thought that it should be used primarily to teach students, let them be kids. And Cyclops was like, no, like they hate us out there, so we have to teach them to be soldiers. And it was really good to see that type of thing where they, you know, they both want what's best for the students, but just want it in different ways. So yeah, I just gave you a couple storylines there, but yes, look them all up, read them, they are excellent. And just a little tidbit, House of M is supposed to be the influence for WandaVision and the Multiverse of Madness upcoming Doctor Strange sequel. Yeah, it was a lot. I want to finish with like actually a recent run, which is the whole Dawn of X series, which is really comprised of a couple things like House of X and the currently running X of Swords. Now, House of X actually provides a really cool relaunching and retelling, like pretty much of what's going forward with the X-Men and what to expect from these characters going forward, especially where it shows that pretty much our main team of X-Men gets killed, and now there are 5 mutants who can bring back any mutant that dies based off of pretty much stored DNA and downloaded consciousness into Cerebro. So some pretty cool stuff here. And also they are on the island of Krakoa, where they are seeking to become a sovereign nation in return for giving resources that the island produces to help humanity, but obviously only in exchange for becoming a sovereign nation. And obviously this causes problems, because why would humanity want all those powerful people on a nation by themselves governing themselves, right? So that's that conflict. And I'm not going to talk about X of Swords as of yet. I think I'll make a whole video on that. But yes, the stories that I just went through, they're not the only X-Men stories. I could probably go through 20, but those are some that I feel like are heavily adapted, but people don't really know about them, and they just go by the animated series or maybe the movies, but they don't know. But I feel like you should read them, and you'll definitely have a better understanding of the X-Men. But yes, I'll probably do a part 2 to this eventually, right? But until then, please read all this stuff. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you learned anything from it, or let me know if you want to see anything in a future video. But please make sure, keep on liking the X-Men, keep on shooting those optic blasts, and please don't forget to enter the nerd.